Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to today's lecture. My name is Min Jung Kim, and I am the Barbara B. Taylor Director of the St. Louis Art Museum. And it is my great pleasure to be with you this morning, both in person and virtually. I am especially delighted to welcome audiences back today to the Farrell Auditorium for the first in-person public lecture in this space since the museum's closure in March of 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic. It also happens to be my very first public in-person lecture since my arrival at the museum in September of last year to become the 11th director and also the first woman in that role. And so it is particularly a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here today for today's talk. Each year in March, which is Women's History Month, the museum is honored to present the Mary Strauss Women in the Arts Endowed Lecture. This annual event has been made possible due to the vision, the commitment, and the generosity of Mary Strauss, who is with us this morning. Please join me in thanking Mary for her support of the museum, its programming, and the women in the arts. Mary. Today's speaker is Bridget Quinn, who is the author of the award-winning book, Broad Strokes, 15 Women Who Made Art and Made History in that order. The book was an Amazon pick for Best Art and Photography Books in 2017, and a 2018 Amelia Bloomer List selection of recommended feminist literature from the American Library Association. NPR's Susan Stamberg calls the book, quote, a terrific essay collection, end quote, with, quote, spunky, attitudinal, and smart writing, end quote. Raised on the high plains of Montana, Bridget Quinn has lived since in Norway, New York, Oregon, California, and many other places. She has taught art history, and writing for more than 2 decades, and worked in museums and for galleries and for private collections. She is a graduate of New York University's Institute of Fine Arts and a regular contributor to online arts magazine Hyperallergic. She's a nationally sought-after speaker on women and on art. In 2020, Quinn published She Votes: How U.S. Women Won Suffrage and What Happened Next, which is an Amazon's editor's pick and best history books. It was published to coincide with the 100-year anniversary of ratification of the 19th Amendment, and She Votes features illustrations by 100 contemporary women artists. Her next book concerns French portraitist Adélaïde Labille-Guiard, artistic rivalry, royal patrons, the French Revolution, 18th century feminism, and a 21st century showdown. Don't you want to go out and read that book today? I do. She also promises that ghosts will be included as well. The title of Ms. Quinn's lecture today is She Persisted: Women Artists in Art History. Please join me in welcoming her to the podium.
Thank you so much, Min. I just love hearing you talk about my next book. It makes me excited. I just want to say that you have several paintings by some of the characters in that book in your collection. Thank you so much for having me today. It is really a thrill to be here at the St. Louis Art Museum. This is also my first time out and about in 2 years, and I'm just excited. A little overstimulated, but excited. So forgive me if I get a little giddy. Yesterday I had the chance to tour the permanent collection with curator Amy Torbert, and it was just a gift to see the amazing work that you have here, and it's incredible to me that your museum is free. That is a gift to your entire community. So I guess I'll just dive into talking about the book itself, which is, a story of women artists that came out in 2017. And in those 5 years since, really the hunger for discussing, discovering, and engaging, celebrating women artists has really just grown. And this is Kathleen Gillia's Linda Nochlin at Manet's Folies Bergère from 2005. Of course, I would love to take some credit for, for the celebration of women artists, but all credit goes, in many ways, to Linda Nochlin, who was, in some ways, the godmother of the movement that became feminist art history. And I just love this painting because Gillia captures this same sort of tired exasperation that Manet's barkeep has in his painting. Linda Nochlin passed away the same year the Broad Strokes came out, 2017, but she's really important to me personally, and to, I think, maybe all people who appreciate the work that she did in really breaking open the field of feminist art history. With her 1971 essay, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? And that was this witty polemic that was both bomb and birth for a movement. Nochlin once wrote, "Nothing, I think, is more interesting, more poignant, or more difficult to seize than the intersection of the self and history." And with that in mind, I hope you'll indulge me talking just a little bit about my own history and how it fueled a passion for women in art history. So in 1987, I'm not that old, close. In 1987, I was in California at university for my first year. It was spring, and of course what I would make of myself in the world preoccupied my every waking moment because I was 19. And for some reason, I decided that I wanted to study art history. I actually knew nothing about art, nothing about art history, but for some reason, art was the one thing I most wanted to understand. So in I jumped. A girl from the high plains of Montana, the town I grew up in, Great Falls, had one museum, and it was dedicated to a cowboy artist, Charles M. Russell, who we call Charlie Russell. And this is his Lewis and Clark from 1905. One of the things I find interesting is that it's called Lewis and Clark, but really the central figure is Sacagawea here. The spring of my first college year, if any of you have taken art history, this sort of the major sequence, you begin with Australopithecus basically and work your way slowly forward. So by spring, I was finally in a course called Modern American Art. And it was really thrilling to finally encounter art that I somewhat understood from when I grew up. Regionalist painters that sort of abutted the kind of art that I had seen as a child. And really after 3,000 years of gods and nudes and kings and saints and boating parties on the Seine, it was refreshing. And I give you your own Thomas Hart Benton. This is from his Kansas City department store mural of 1947. And this course on American art was taught by my only female professor, who was a visiting scholar from Texas. And she was just a breath of fresh air for me. She had long, untamed red hair, and she wore men's white shirts and jeans with cowboy boots, and she smoked, and she walked with a cane. She was just rad. And I loved everything about her. She had this kind of very subtle drawl. And so when she said, "This is why abstraction is great and beautiful and true," I just wrote it down and I believed her. And for the first time in my courses that year, I experienced the artworks that were lit up in this big auditorium, not just as signifiers of this time period or that person, but as objects of meaning in themselves, as these sometimes beautiful and maybe sometimes failed expressions across time. expressions of insight, of humanity that touched even me, this sort of pale and clueless woman child with dyed black hair and a newly pierced nose. And honestly, I kind of swooned with the romance of it. I was so excited to see this kind of art. And at the same time, there was some niggle I couldn't quite get my hands around that bothered me. But I didn't know what it was, and I put it out of mind and just kept taking notes. By the second week of modern American art, believe me, we never saw another place but New York City again. And maybe we would go to Europe and peek in on what was happening there with Picasso or some of the artists who were coming to America like Mondrian or Duchamp. Very occasionally, a wife or maybe a female model might be mentioned, but not very often. And mostly I just took notes and mostly liked what I saw. And then one day, my professor did not dim the lights in the auditorium, and she just started talking, kind of leaning at a jaunty angle on her cane. And she started talking about this person named Jackson Pollock, who was born in Wyoming, which I could not believe, and went to high school in California. And I was on fire already. I thought, there are artists that come out of the American West? How can this be? And she put on her glasses and she read something that young Jackson had written in a questionnaire at the time he was exactly the age I was when she read it. As to what I would like to be, it is difficult to say, an artist of some kind. And the whole world narrowed for me to the pinprick of my professor on stage. And I just thought, you can just decide to become an artist? That can happen? And right as I was having this sort of transcendent moment, something was bugging me and I didn't know what it was. And right then, the lights went down and she put up 2 slides. Oh, I'm sorry. One, Jackson Pollock's Autumn Rhythm number 30 from 1950. I think worth saying that Jackson Pollock, you may know this, was a student of Thomas Hart Benton's. So he has this tradition based in the American West for sure. But she put up 2 slides, Jackson Pollock, and one by someone she said was named Lee Krasner. This is Milkwood from 1955. And then she said, who was his wife. And I could not believe it. This Lee was a woman, and she was an artist, and she was good. This niggle that I had became kind of an overwhelming bodily sensation, and I don't remember the rest of the lecture, but as soon as it was over, I marched my combat boots to the arts library, and I checked out 3 books on Jackson Pollock. Surprise, there were no books on Lee Krasner, but I found out through his biography about her, how she had attended the Art Students League before him, where she was so accomplished that her instructor, Hans Hofmann, paid her the ultimate compliment: "This is so good, you would not know it was made by a woman." At that, I closed the book I was reading, and I thought about the volumes of art that I'd grown up with. My family owned a set of Time Life books. I don't know if any of you remember these, but they were, I see some nodding, they were a very large series, dozens of books that were in gray, matching gray slipcovers, and they were filled with reproductions. And at a time when the internet did not exist, this was really the only way a person who grew up where I did would have seen great art. And I loved those books for years, until about age 10, when I realized that none of them were dedicated to a woman. And then I believed that I had uncovered another terrible adult truth, of which I was learning many at around the age of 10, and this one was that women could not be important artists. And after that, those books just made me a little sad. So I went to my locker in the arts library, and I took out my textbook, which anyone who studied art history in probably the 70s and 80s and into the 90s probably used, H.W. Jansen's History of Art. And when I speak in California, I bring it with me because it's an awesome aid. I slap it down on the table because it's huge. Very dramatic. It's about 800 pages. And I began paging through from the dawn of human history, and it wasn't until I got to page 500, the early 17th century in the Italian Baroque, that I read Artemisia Gentileschi, followed by the line, "We have not encountered a woman artist thus far." And This painting, Judith severing the head of Holofernes, this is the second version from around 1620, has become quite famous in the last few years. It's kind of standard internet meme culture. At the Women's March in 2017, I actually saw it on several posters. So a kind of surprising moment from the past that captures a moment now, which is ostensibly a woman's revenge on a man. Though, much to say about that, and I'm not going to say it now. Artemisia Gentileschi herself, since 2017, has become far more widely known. There was a major exhibition of her work in London. It was supposed to open in 2020. Because of COVID, it didn't. I believe it has already closed, but it was up for quite a while. And right now, there's a traveling show that began at the Wadsworth Athenaeum and is now at the Detroit Institute of Art, Artemisia Gentileschi and Women of Early Modern Italy. So she is taking her place, really, in the firmament of the greats of art history after, 1,000 years. Maybe not quite that long, but a while, long enough. But you don't have to go to Detroit to see Artemisia, because this beautiful painting, Danae from 1612, is in your collection, and I got to see it yesterday, and it is an absolute jewel. It is, in so many ways, sort of the opposite of her famous Holofernes painting, because here, if you don't know the story of Danae, she is imprisoned by her father because an oracle has told him that she'll bear a child who will kill him. So he imprisons her so that nothing funny can happen, and Zeus, that clever god, comes to her as a shower of golden rain, and she does become pregnant. And what's interesting, I think, about Artemisia's take is that Danae has her own sensuality. She seems to embody her own pleasure, and there's something very refreshing in that. Artemisia is known for her powerful women. She painted many heroines of the Old Testament, and they always have this kind of sturdy sense of self. So, noted, I wrote down Artemisia Gentileschi, and I began going through Janson page by page and writing down the name of every woman I encountered. And by the time I got to the final page, approximately 800, I had a list of 16 women. And except for Mary Cassatt and Georgia O'Keeffe and very recently Lee Krasner, I didn't know any of their names. I show this just because it's a pleasure. Linda Nochlin wrote about this painting in the Loge from 1879 because it so beautifully illustrates the idea that, so here's this woman, she's at the theater watching, something on stage herself, and even there, she is the object of the male gaze. He has his opera glasses pointed on her. And also in your collection is Cassatt's Head of Simone in a green bonnet with a wavy brim. Cassatt was one of the innovators of pastel in the Impressionist movement. This is from 1904. And if you know Mary Cassatt's work, most Americans think of her as a painter of women and children. And this comes a bit from her first big show in the United States was a 1915 suffragist exhibition to raise money for suffrage. And because her family were anti-suffrage, her brothers, nieces, nephews, they withheld her most important early works from the show. And her most recent works were mostly mother and children paintings. So she kind of has this maybe a little bit sentimental reputation in the United States, but I think it's important to realize that even that, a portrait of a young girl who is nobody, or in this print, two women having tea, Cassatt is looking at the world around her, and that's a women's world, of children, nursemaids, her mother, her sister, women having tea. And for the first time in Western art, these are subjects that are worthy of high art. So a little more radical than we might encounter them or feel that they are now. I was astonished to find there were only 16 artists in Jansen, so at my professor's office hours, I went to tell her that there were only 16 women in Jansen. And she laughed and said, she had kind of a gravelly voice, and she said, "Oh, you've got the new edition. Our version didn't have a single woman in it with her clothes on." And then she kind of said, "Well, no, not really, but you know what I mean, no women artists." And in fact, I had the new edition of Jansen that only had women because he had come under pressure from women like Linda Nochlin to begin to include some women in the history of art. So he did it under duress. I asked if I could do my research paper on Krasner. She said yes, and she said, "Yes, you can do it, but understand that finding sources will be difficult." And it was. But what it taught me was how to look for women in the interstices, how to look at footnotes or references and kind of reverse engineer to find who I was looking for. And I kept my Jansen list, and I would begin to look for them as well over the next few years and to find out more about them. This is Rosa Bonheur's Plowing in the Nivernais from 1849. Rosa Bonheur was, completely overlooked at the time in the 80s when I was finding out about her, because academic painting was not the fashion in any way. She was an animal painter. In her lifetime, she was the most famous woman artist in the world, and she was quite famous. Girls in the United States could play with Rosa Bonheur dolls the way in the 20th century they would play with Shirley Temple dolls. This massive painting is in the Musée d'Orsay and was a gold medal winner at the Salon. And you have, let's see, what's it called? Hold on. Relay Hunting, 1887. America always loved Rosa Bonheur. She became friends with Wild Bill Hickok. She loved the American exhibition at the 1889 World's Fair in Paris. She had many collectors in the United States. One of her masterpieces, The Horse Fair, is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And more than that, she attracted interest from America as a celebrity. She was not just an independent woman, but a lesbian who wore pants when she had to get a special dispensation from the police in order to be allowed to wear them legally. She lived her entire adult life with a childhood friend who, on his deathbed, her father, sort of consecrated them in marriage. Natalie Mika died when Rosa was not young, but not long after a American woman, Anna Klumke, who was a painter from San Francisco, came to visit her and help translate for an American philanthropist, and they fell in love, and she became the second great love of Rosa Bonheur's life. So a startling discovery, as you can imagine, for me at the age of 19 in college, to find someone that seemed so contemporary and also had this connection to California where I was. So I was fascinated by these artists that I was discovering in Jansen, although some didn't always interest me that much. I also was able to, because I was kind of looking in these strange places, come across other women artists who weren't in Jansen. And, I just want to say really quickly that Rosa Bonheur was just the Google Doodle a few days ago. So, very mainstream, and Edmonia Lewis here, in her carte de visite photo from 1870, was just issued. Her portrait was just issued on a U.S. stamp, I believe, yesterday. So very exciting to see such a huge change in sort of just general public awareness of these artists. Edmonia Lewis was a sculptor. She was Black and Chippewa. She grew up in upstate New York, went to Oberlin, but spent most of her adult life as an independent artist abroad in Rome, ran a very successful studio there, and you have one of her busts here, The Head of a Woman, from 1873, and it is not my story to tell, but I think there might be an exciting tale tale behind this bust in that this may be the portrait of another woman artist, which would be an exciting revelation. Lewis lived in a community of other expat sculptors abroad, women, who were called somewhat derogatorily the White Marmorian Flock by Henry James. But they were incredibly successful, well-known. Very close to this piece upstairs is a work by Harriet Hosmer called Zenobia in Chains. And Hosmer was kind of one of the leaders of this expat group. When I say that they were successful, they were world-renowned, and Edmonia Lewis was well known enough that her studio was one of the main stops that Americans on the Grand Tour would take to see what an American artist abroad, what her work was like, to meet this celebrity. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow visited her. Frederick Douglass, when he was on his honeymoon, stopped and made a visit. So a little bit like Rosa Bonheur, but to a greater extent, she was famous in her lifetime, but after her death was really forgotten. And because of that, what the work that's considered her most, well, certainly her most monumental, this weighs several tons, The Death of Cleopatra, but also probably her masterpiece from 1876, it was lost for 100 years. No one knew what had happened to it. And it is an absolutely incredible story, and one that I'm afraid I don't have time to tell, but you can read it in my book if you want to, or somewhere else. I don't know, go online. I tell it quite well, I think. You know, it had not been found when I was first finding out about Edmonia Lewis, and the story is absolutely incredible, but basically an independent scholar begins to piece together where she might be and ends up finding the Queen of Egypt in a holiday storage closet in a shopping mall in Forest Park, Illinois. And she talks about the door opening and the lights coming up and seeing the Queen of Egypt surrounded by holiday decorations and papier-mâché turkeys and Christmas lights and Christmas elves. And it's now in the Smithsonian. So you never know what's out there, you guys. So because I was attending college in California, I also became interested in West Coast artists, again, who have recently seen a resurgence of interest in their work. This is Ruth Asawa from 1955. And Asawa also had a US stamp, I think 2 or 3 years ago. Asawa was born in California, but she was interned with her family during World War II. And after trying to become an art teacher and not really being allowed to do it because she was Japanese American, she left and went to Black Mountain College to study art. Black Mountain is really ground zero in many ways for modernism in the United States. And she was just a person who never let anything stop her. She's one of my personal heroes. She had 6 children, and she never stopped working. This is a photograph by her friend, the photographer Imogen Cunningham, from 1951, and it's just such a great painting. Like the baby, I don't think he even has a diaper on. He's drinking a bottle. Other kids are, you know, reading the comics or something, and she's just got her head down working. It's fantastic. And Asawa, too, was successful in her lifetime. Had shows, exhibitions internationally. This is an interior shot of the De Young Museum in San Francisco, where her work is on permanent display. But maybe most importantly to the city of San Francisco, Asawa was an activist for arts education and the first public high school for the arts in all of the West Coast is the Ruth Asawa School of the Arts in San Francisco. Asawa, no surprise, was not in Jansen. And I wasn't too surprised either because I had a chip on my shoulder and still do about the West being overlooked. But it might surprise you who else was not in Jansen. This is 1987. And Frida Kahlo was not considered an important artist. Of all of her self-portraits, I like to show this one because she's wearing that hand earring. And the earrings were a gift from Picasso. And after her death, her room was sealed by order of her husband. And when it was opened several decades later, in her jewelry drawer, there was only one. And I like to think, like, even Frida Kahlo, if you get a gift, even from Picasso, you're always going to lose one earring. So it's a great earring, but there's only one, and there were ones too. So, you know, there's something, I don't know, disagreeable about realizing that she wasn't in this major survey of art. But, you know, we think everyone knows Frida Kahlo now, and I'm sure all of you recognized who this was when I put it up, but I'm here to tell you that not very long ago, they didn't. And when I was a student at UC Santa Barbara, I had no idea who she was when I saw her picture on the t-shirts of Latina activists on campus. And when I found out it was a self-portrait, I went to try to find out about her, and I found a newly published biography of her that, in the regular library, not the arts library, that had been the first written in English. So during her lifetime and for many decades after her death, it was not Kahlo who was considered an important artist, but of course her husband, Diego Rivera. This has also been widely shared in the last few years, but the first time I ever found it, believe me, I almost fell over. Wife of the master mural painter gleefully dabbles in works of art. And what makes it so funny, of course, is that if there's anyone for whom gleefully dabble does not fit, it's Frida Kahlo. And the text does not match that headline. She basically says to the person interviewing her, it's me who's the great artist and not little Diego. So she knew her worth. This is from a Detroit newspaper in the 1930s when Rivera was in Detroit doing the murals for the Detroit Industry Murals. Okay, so there are many ways in which women, sometimes very successful in their lifetimes, sometimes maybe already hidden within fathers or brothers or husbands' herbs, how they're lost to history. But I'm going to tell just one story kind of in depth. And it again begins when I'm in college. You're wondering, why are you showing this? This is a Hellenistic sculpture of Laocoon and his sons, big influence on Michelangelo. So as a baby art historian, I was taught that the essence of my training was going to be in cultivating an unerring sense of connoisseurship. And what is connoisseurship? It is ostensibly knowing who made what just by looking at it. To be able to assess by attitude, gesture, mood, whatever, you know, the hand of the artist, the hand of the master, a daunting goal. But when I got into grad school at an esteemed New York institution, I thought someday this power would be mine. And at lunch one day when I was still an undergraduate, I had just been accepted to grad school, I was having lunch with my new boyfriend, who is now my husband of 30 years. And Professor Alfred Moyer came out and joined us. And I showed this sculpture because Moyer always reminded me of Laocoon. He had like this big beard and big curly head. He was sort of classical looking and also very intimidating. And I was nervous. My boyfriend at the time was a graduate student, so he was a little more chill. But finally, I sort of burst out, I'm going to graduate school in New York. And said where I was going, and instead of heaping on praise the way everyone else who I had told this to, who knew, did, Moyer just crossed his very big arms and said, well, you know the problem with connoisseurship, don't you? And I said, I did not know there was a problem with connoisseurship. And then I was even more surprised when he leaned forward and shook a finger in my face and said, it doesn't take into account when the artist wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. It doesn't consider the really shitty day. And I never forgot that, the really shitty day. That's me quoting an esteemed professor of Baroque art, okay? But when I went to grad school, I never forgot it. And I also began to develop a counter theory that I call, and I'm going to amend it slightly for public use, the effing excellent day. And the effing excellent day might happen to anyone, really. So in 1917, the Metropolitan Museum of Art received what was, even by their august standards, a really fabulous gift. And it was this monumental painting, the portrait of Charlotte de Verdun, by father and undisputed master of 18th century French painting, Jacques-Louis David. And the original press release, which I was very interested to find they had already in 1917, announced, as one of the masterpieces of this artist, the picture will henceforth be known in the art world as the New York David, just as we speak of the man with a fur cap of the Hermitage or the Sistine Madonna of Dresden. So in other words, it would be a landmark work in the Met's already world-class collection. And right away, this painting was one of the Met's most popular works. And if they'd had merchandising in 1917, believe me, they would have thrown it on everything, and it would have sold like beer at a ballpark. You can go into the Met Archives and see decades of postcards and letters, and maybe there's emails now, of visitors saying how much they love this painting and what it means to them. And it is quite haunting if you've ever seen it in person. Standing before her, it's really difficult to look away. And for years, first as a student across the street and then later working at the Met, I would often pause before the young and compelling Charlotte, and always had this feeling that if I could just be still enough and the galleries could grow quiet enough, she might speak. And it is a very simple painting. Not much seems to happen. She wears this simple white dress. She has very few adornments. She has sort of this rose-colored sash and a pin in her hair, and wears a brooch at her neck that holds her sort of fichu around her neck. And then there's this rose-colored shawl across the back of the chair, which is the only piece of furniture in the room. And she holds this large folder in her left hand, and in her right, you can just see that there is a pen or pencil. So she's an artist of some kind. These were folders of a kind that were used for drawing. And she looks at us so intently that it feels to me like she's looking at us, that I'm the person when I'm standing there who's in her art. But it's impossible to make out her expression. Is she smiling? Is she serious? Is she thoughtful, sad? She's very mysterious. She might even be called the Mona Lisa of the Met. She sits on this simple piece of furniture. There's nothing else in the room. There's nothing on the wall. But if you look behind her, there's this scene through the window. And on this raised balcony are a man and woman who have these indistinct facial features, but you can see that they're looking toward each other. And you can also see, at least in the original, maybe not here, that the woman is dressed like Charlotte. She's wearing white, and she has a rose-colored shawl thrown across her shoulders. And what else? There's this broken pane of glass between her and the people behind her. It's so mysterious. It's a great painting. But what does it mean? What's happening? How are we supposed to understand it? Well, no one knows for sure, and certainly I didn't know when I was 22 years old and first encountered this painting in person, but I thought I did know. And surprise. And what I thought is that it was about a love affair, and that the woman in the background and the woman in the foreground were the same person, so that two scenes are happening in one painting, the way they would maybe in an early Renaissance painting. And obviously, to me at least, the broken window symbolized a loss of innocence. And I thought, her secret is that she's pregnant. But it turns out that is not the real mystery. Take a little drink of water to increase the tension. In 1951, a French art historian named Charles Sterling had revealed that the painting could not possibly be by David. His reasoning is airtight, and I can explain it to you if you want to know it. Not now. And he said it was likely by a woman painter named Constance Charpentier. It's from this is Charpentier's Melancholy from 1801, which is the same year as the portrait of Charlotte de Verdun. Sterling was surprised when people accepted his tentative attribution as gospel. Okay, now it's by Charpentier. And I was surprised when I did the research to see that no one said, oh my God, we've found a previously unknown painter equal to the great David. No one said that. The public continued to love the painting, but many academics had a change of heart about the painting itself. Sterling himself, in his 1951 article, said some not very nice things about the Metz painting, beginning with, the notion that our portrait may have been painted by a woman is, let us confess, an attractive idea. Why? Because it explains all the cleverly concealed weaknesses and the 1,000 subtle artifices that all add up to the feminine spirit. It sucks, you guys. It actually sucks. After the reattribution, scholars would also claim that they were never fooled. British critic James Lawver wrote, although the painting is extremely attractive as a period piece, there are certain weaknesses of which a painter of David's caliber would not have been guilty. But to the rescue, Bernard Berenson, one of the most renowned art historians of his day and famous for his work in attributions, he said, not only is this one of the greatest masterpieces of all time, it is also by David, because that's the only explanation. And in case you don't know David, I'll just show a somewhat similar painting. This is Madame Récamier from 1800, so around the same time. David's finish isn't always this loose, but it doesn't look like David. I think we can all agree now. It is, I think, worth saying that though the Met's own curator and in their own magazine, they published that the famous painting was not by the famous painter in 1951. It wasn't until 1977 that they removed David's name from the picture frame. And it wasn't until the 1990s that a doctoral candidate named Margaret Oppenheimer discovered that the portrait of Charlotte de Verdun was in fact by another painter who was also a woman, Marie-Denise Vierre. Kind of an astonishing coincidence. And Vierre is an artist about whom we don't know very much. She came from a family of artists. She had two sisters who were both painters, quite successful. One was the student of Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun. Marie-Denise Vierre was married to an architect, and perhaps that's one reason why she was able to be a married woman and continue to work. I say that just in the sense that perhaps an architect has an openness to the creative life. I have no idea. So to further understand the painting, since we don't know very much about Vierre, we have to look at the subject. And in a Metropolitan Museum of Art lecture from 2014, that was online, and I hope still is, and well worth watching, by art historian and real gumshoe Anne Higonnet, she describes going to Paris to find this room, and she finds it. And the story is amazing. And what she discovers is that this is actually a gallery of the Louvre itself. And it was once an atelier where female students studied art, separate and unequal from male students. And Higonnet further concludes that the sitter is definitely Charlotte de Verdun, and she believes that the painter is also Marie-Denise Vierre. And she believes that because both of them were students in this atelier at the same time. And Higonnet's discovery helps us close this amazing psychic gap in our understanding of the painting, because it's the portrait of one young woman artist by another. So it's likely not about sexual anxiety after all, but about artistic anxiety. Though the two really can't be untwined. For the vast majority of female artists then, giving in to romantic love would have meant giving up art, and it happened over and over again. In Vierre's portrait, what separates the interior of the Louvre, where art is made and fame secured, from the outside world of romance and domestic life, is a broken pane of glass. And Charlotte herself is an object lesson. Like so many women, she gave up the dream of art when she became a wife and mother. And that's not just because of social pressures that bore down on her, but it was a terrible time to be a woman artist in France. The French Revolution was, in some ways, politically advanced, but it was socially conservative when it came to women and was a disaster for women artists. Marie-Denise Vierre, who was married 5 years already when this portrait was done, carried on even as France became increasingly difficult for women artists to survive and thrive. So a singular moment in time is really the secret of Vier's fabulous painting, when two young women longing to make art found each other, and in this brief moment of communion with each other, with ambition, a kind of perfection happens, and longing and kinship and ability became an effing excellent day. I think it's important to me, that I don't leave us in Paris because I don't want to give the impression that you have to grow up in Paris with access to education in the Louvre to become an important artist. You don't even have to be married to a internationally famous muralist and have Leon Trotsky as your lover in Mexico City to be a great artist. This is a print by Kara Walker. It's from your collection. It's called African American from 1998. This is Walker's signature style, this kind of silhouette that harkens back both to a kind of 18th century popular art form and also encourages stereotypes. Walker is from Stockton, California, and if you don't know California, Stockton is in the Central Valley, and it is not a place known for producing world-famous artists. Walker has been successful from a very young age. She went to the Rhode Island School of Design. She was one of the youngest people to ever receive a MacArthur Fellowship, sometimes called the Genius Grant. She was the first living artist, I think in 2006, to curate a show from the permanent collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And just last week, or this month for sure, she received the Academy of Arts and Letters Gold Medal for Graphic Art. One of our most important living artists, and you can find out about her anywhere. But an artist who I would imagine I might be introducing you to is another California artist, Susan O'Malley. And this is her work, Lawn, from 2006. Susan O'Malley is from a suburb of San Jose, also not known for its robust culture, necessarily. She was one of 6 children. She went to Stanford. After Stanford, she did not study art, she studied urban planning. After Stanford, she went to New York, like many aspiring young people do. But when she was 24, she wrote back to California to a friend, "I want to go back to my 8th grade dream of being an artist, because if I don't do it now, then when will I? Why delay the truth in your heart?" And so she left New York and moved back home, and she moved into her mother's garage and used that as her studio and went from Stanford to Foothill Community College and took up art making. And that might be a step down for a lot of Stanford grads, but O'Malley took it in stride, and she put a note in all of her neighbors' mailboxes telling them that she was the new artist in residence of the Willow Glen neighborhood, and not to be alarmed if they saw art springing up in the neighborhood. Here's Crop Circle, San Jose. And her work around the neighborhood is all like this. Lawn, Crop Circle, San Jose. It demonstrates, her disarming wit and her earnestness, which is often rare in contemporary art, but also O'Malley's talent for community and her willingness and desire to elevate all kinds of people and places as being worthy of fine art. O'Malley's life and work are an inspiration to me. I hope they will be to you as well. Hers is the last chapter in Broad Strokes. Quite tragically, O'Malley died quite suddenly at the age of 38. And before she died, she had just finished a project called Advice from My 80-Year-Old Self. It was a book, and it came out after her death. O'Malley asked more than 100 people of all ages and walks of life to imagine time traveling into the future and meeting their 80-year-old self and asking that person what advice they would give them now. It will be more beautiful than you could ever imagine. Oh my God. And the book has these big sheets filled with her trademark bold text and brilliant colors, except one, which is actually my favorite in the whole book, Art Before Dishes. And I believe it, and I try to live by it. And I tell my husband that. And, you know, thank God for us that O'Malley did too. Do things that matter to your heart. And I'll just leave it there. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks. I had a question, Bridget. I, too, had the Jansen survey text in the 1980s as a college student. I was wondering, I haven't looked at very many art history survey texts since then. Are you noticing any changes in the traditional survey, or in the current survey text, that they're including more women artists?
Well, I will say that they have gotten much better. There's one, Marilyn Stockstad, I noticed it in the green room actually, that is fantastic. But I think actually survey texts, I don't know for sure, maybe someone who teaches would know better than me. I would guess that they're falling out of use because the internet makes it so easy to look at art online. So I do think it's getting better. I think you would be stunned to know, though, the discrepancy statistically in women artists, in collections, in galleries, in sales. So it's still quite extreme, but it's definitely changing. It's hard
And
to
just
have
a
to look
reminder,
over.
anybody who has a question, please come up to the microphone. Thank you.
This is just a thank you and a quick comment. I thought you might enjoy knowing that Jansen taught here. He was here for many years at WashU before he went to New York, and he put together a collection. And at one point, he sold things that had come to WashU,
I heard.
including Rosa Bonheur.
Rosa Bonheur and, if I believe, also Harriet Hosmer.
Oh, yeah.
He was not a fan. He was not a fan.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't.
He also taught at the place that I went to graduate
I
school.
know. But anyway, I think we would have a different collection had his taste not shaped so much of St. Louis at that moment.
Yeah.
So I thank you so much for this, and I appreciate the breadth and knowledge and passion that you brought to it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to just say, you know, when you say if Jansen, or if he had been a different person or had a different attitude, we are living in a historical moment right now. We are going to, we can change the past and the future with our choices. And it's essential that we do that.
I would say there is a superb new textbook put out by Thames and Hudson.
Thank you.
Which is both online and bigger than Jansen.
Great.
One of the authors is Stacy Sloboda, who was here in the St. Louis area for many years, now at BU, and it's worth reading. So it is a
Oh,
revision.
thank you so much. And I also
Called
hope...
The Global Art History. It's in 2 volumes.
I was just going to say, so it's called Global Art History. That I also hope art history education isn't as siloed Western as it was for me. And I told Amy yesterday that when I was a student, I learned no American art history until World War II, or just before World War II. And I don't think that was unusual. It was just very French-centric.
It was true at NYU in the 80s, that's right. Anyway, thank you, that was superb.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bridget, for that wonderful talk. I was wondering if you might be able to share what your process was like to get down to the 15 artists that you chose to include
It was
in the
like
book.
this.
And if there was, you know, like if there's a 16th who was hardest to make the cut.
Okay, thank you. That is a writer's question for sure. So yeah, when I went to Chronicle, who were incredible, you know, they didn't want to create, obviously. No one needs another survey. And we decided that we would stick with the number that Jansen had in his book. Jansen had 16, I have 15. The way the book ends is that there's always room for one more. 15 just seemed better on a title, I think. But choosing how to narrow it down was horrific, and I made some mistakes for sure. Although I'm astonished at, I mean, not to take so much credit, but the prescience is pretty amazing. Who would ever have thought that Artemisia Gentileschi would be like the you know, artist of the Me Too movement? No one could have seen that coming. Seeing the absolute passion for Edmonia Lewis, who was really not talked about for so long, or Ruth Asawa now, is so exciting. But the person I made the biggest mistake with was Hilma af Klint, who is a Swedish mystic painter who I was absolutely obsessed with because I had been an exchange student in Norway and had also been a Waldorf teacher. She was a follower of Rudolf Steiner, who started Waldorf education, and I had discovered her work in the 80s when it was first kind of refound, and I thought, oh, I really want to write about her, but it's too much my weird idiosyncratic obsession. And then a year after Broad Strokes came out, the Guggenheim did a Hilma af Klint show, and it was the biggest blockbuster in Guggenheim history. So that was my mistake. I should have done a little medium work before. But this was with my agent and my editor, how to decide who to pick. It came down to very idiosyncratic choices, but two main ideas: to be able to tell a kind of arc of art history by using representatives from different eras, to try to have some diversity of all kinds, although it's still very much a Western art history take. And then they had to be artists that I had some passionate engagement with, that I had some life-altering experience with, because my story kind of threads through the book.
Hi, my name is Jenna. I'm a female artist. I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and I'm actually the photographer here.
Fantastic.
So a lot of the things that were up there I saw, and they really are beautiful, so if everyone hasn't seen them, they should. But my question is that I make work on women's experience, and I'm going to grad school, and I want to know what characteristics or themes you're finding in contemporary and modern female artists that really make them different or will make them go down in history. What are some of those characteristics?
You know, I think we just live in such a pluralist time that I can't say I see everything. One of the things that's been maybe the most surprising of the last 10 years has been a complete return to figurative art and portraiture, and I find it pretty exciting. But you still see all kinds of art. I don't actually personally think that there's a kind of essentialist difference between the art that women make and the art that men make. But I mean, I wish I had an answer for you. I think what engages me is art that is passionate about the moment that we're in right now. And if you're doing that, it can be excellent work. I think it's very tempting, especially with Instagram, to see so much work and to be drawn in different directions. I don't know if that was helpful.
It's helpful, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we'll end with one last question
Okay.
that's come in from our live streaming,
Okay.
from somebody watching on Zoom. Will there be a sequel, 15 more women who made art and made history?
Or as someone said on Instagram, broader strokes. I don't know. It's not my next book for sure, although Adélaïde Lebiguiard, who I have been passionately consumed with for 30 years, is chapter 3 of Broad Strokes and will be my third book. But you never know. You never know. It's not in the works.
Thank you so very, very much, Bridget.
Thank
Quinn.
you so much for having me. Thank you.